I was invisible. Not the kind of invisible where people bumped into you on the sidewalk, but the kind where their eyes slid right past you like you were part of the concrete, another piece of urban decay they'd trained themselves not to see. I'd been living under the Interstate 35 overpass in downtown Minneapolis for 8 months, tucked into a spot where the concrete pillars created a natural alcove that blocked most of the wind. My sleeping bag was military issue, one of the few things I'd kept from my previous life, back when I had a name that meant something, back when people saluted me instead of crossing the street to avoid me. The cardboard sign propped against my backpack read, "Homeless Veteran. Anything helps. God bless." I'd stopped believing the God bless part around month 3, but people seemed to expect it, so I kept it there. Most days I made enough for a hot meal at the shelter and maybe a beer from the convenience store that didn't ask questions. The store owner, a Pakistani man with kind eyes, always gave me an extra $1 in change. Small mercies in a world that had forgotten mercy existed. My name is Marcus Webb, though that hardly mattered anymore. I was 34 years old with the face of a man pushing 50. 2 tours in Afghanistan as an Army Ranger, a medical discharge after an IED took out half my platoon, and left me with shrapnel in my leg and nightmares that never quite left. The VA had tried, I'll give them that, but pills only work if you can afford to keep taking them, and therapy only helps if you have an address stable enough to keep appointments. I'd lost my apartment 6 months after discharge, lost my girlfriend 2 months after that, and lost any sense of who I was supposed to be somewhere in between. The spot under the overpass was good, all things considered. Close enough to downtown that foot traffic meant potential income, far enough from the police station that cops didn't roust us too often. There were 5 of us regulars. An older woman everyone called Duchess who claimed she'd been a concert pianist before the drugs. A kid who couldn't have been more than 19 who never told us his real name, and 2 men in their 50s who kept to themselves and shared everything they had with a quiet dignity that broke my heart. That November evening started like any other. Cold enough that my breath fogged in the air, but not cold enough that I risked frostbite if I stayed still too long. I was counting the day's earnings, $11.37, when I heard the sound that changed everything. Tires squealing, shouting, the distinctive crack of gunfire that my body recognized before my mind did, sending me flat against the concrete on pure instinct. I looked up from behind the pillar to see a black sedan fishtailing around the corner, followed by 2 SUVs in pursuit. More gunfire. The sedan's back window exploded outward, glass raining onto the street like deadly snow. The car swerved wildly, trying to evade its pursuers, and I watched in horror as it lost control, jumped the curb, and slammed directly into the concrete barrier not 20 feet from where I crouched. The SUVs didn't stop. They kept going, disappearing around the next corner with screeching tires and the smell of burnt rubber hanging in the cold air. For a moment, everything was silent except for the hiss of the sedan's destroyed engine and the distant sound of the city that hadn't even noticed the violence that had just erupted. I should have stayed hidden. Every survival instinct I'd developed on the streets and in combat zones screamed at me to keep my head down, to pretend I'd seen nothing, to let whatever criminal enterprise had just played out resolve itself without my involvement. But I'd been a soldier once, and some training runs deeper than common sense. I approached the sedan carefully, legs shaking from adrenaline and the cold. The driver's side door had crumpled inward from the impact, but the passenger side was intact. I pulled the door open, and smoke billowed out, making me cough. Inside, slumped against the steering wheel, was a man in his early 40s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I'd made in my last year of real employment. Blood ran from a gash on his forehead, and his breathing was shallow, labored. "Hey," I said, reaching in to check his pulse. Strong but fast. Shock, probably a concussion, possibly internal injuries I couldn't see. "Hey, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. They were dark, almost black in the dim light from the street lamps. He tried to speak, but only managed to groan. "Don't move," I said, my medic training from the Army kicking in automatically. "You've been in an accident. I'm going to help you, but you need to stay still." I could hear sirens in the distance, growing closer. Someone had called 911, which meant I had maybe 2 minutes before this situation became a lot more complicated for me. Homeless veterans at crime scenes tended to become suspects rather than witnesses, a lesson I'd learned the hard way. But I couldn't leave him. Whatever he'd done, whoever he was a human being bleeding in a wrecked car, and I'd taken an oath once to protect people. That oath hadn't come with an expiration date. I checked him for obvious injuries, found a gunshot wound in his shoulder that was bleeding heavily. Without thinking, I stripped off my jacket, the only real coat I owned, and pressed it against the wound, applying pressure the way I'd been taught a lifetime ago. The man's eyes focused on me then, really focused, and I saw something in them I didn't expect. Not gratitude exactly, but recognition, like he was memorizing my face. "Marcus," I said, not sure why I was giving him my name. "You're going to be okay. Help is coming." He grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, pulling me closer. When he spoke, his voice was rough but clear. "They'll kill me. At the hospital. They'll finish it." "Who will?" "Everyone." He coughed, blood flecking his lips. "You saved my life. I remember that. I pay my debts." The sirens were close now, maybe a block away. I could see the flash of red and blue lights reflecting off the buildings. "I have to go," I said, trying to pull away. He held on. "Your name. Tell me your name." "Marcus Webb." He nodded once, then released my wrist as his eyes rolled back, and he lost consciousness. I pressed my jacket harder against his shoulder wound, then stepped back as the first patrol car screeched to a stop. I melted into the shadows under the overpass, watching as paramedics swarmed the sedan, as police officers cordoned off the area, as the man in the expensive suit was loaded onto a stretcher and rushed away. Duchess appeared beside me, her weathered face creased with worry. "You okay, baby? That was some crazy shit." "I'm fine," I said, though my hands were shaking and covered in someone else's blood. My jacket, my only warm coat, was gone, seized as evidence, or lost in the chaos. "I'm fine." I wasn't fine. That night, huddled in my sleeping bag with the temperature dropping into the 20s, I couldn't stop thinking about the man in the car, about the way he'd looked at me, about his words. "I pay my debts." It was the kind of thing people said in movies, not real life, and certainly not to homeless veterans who saved them on impulse. The next morning, I was panhandling at my usual corner when the black sedan pulled up. Not the crashed one, but identical in make and model, pristine and gleaming in the weak November sunlight. The back window rolled down, and a woman looked out. She was maybe 30, with sharp features and sharper eyes, wearing a suit that matched the car's expense level. "Marcus Webb?" she asked. Every instinct screamed danger. "Who's asking?" "Someone who wants to thank you for last night." "Get in." "I'm good here." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That wasn't a request. My employer wants to speak with you. You can come voluntarily, or we can make this difficult. Your choice." I looked up and down the street. 2 more identical sedans had appeared, boxing me in. Pedestrians were giving us a wide berth, that city instinct that trouble was brewing. I thought about running, but where would I go? I had no home to hide in, no resources to disappear with. And if I was being honest, I was curious. Dangerously, stupidly curious. "Fine," I said, picking up my backpack with all my worldly possessions. "But if you're going to kill me, at least tell me why first." She actually laughed at that. "If we wanted you dead, you'd be dead. This is something else entirely." The car's interior smelled like leather and money, a stark contrast to the funk of unwashed bodies and decay I'd grown accustomed to. The woman sat across from me, studying me with the intensity of someone doing a threat assessment. I'd done enough of those myself to recognize the look. "What's your name?" I asked, figuring if I was going to die, I might as well know who was responsible. "Elena," she said. "I'm head of security for Mr. Volkov." The name meant nothing to me, but the way she said it suggested it should have. "Is that the guy from last night? The one in the car?" "That's him. And thanks to you, he's currently recovering from a gunshot wound and a severe concussion instead of being dead in a gutter. He wanted to meet you personally." We drove through downtown, into the wealthy neighborhood where mansions sat behind iron gates and perfectly manicured lawns. The kind of neighborhood where my presence would normally trigger immediate police response. The car pulled through one such gate, up a long driveway to a house that could have housed 50 people easily. Inside, everything was marble and crystal, and the kind of art that belonged in museums. Elena led me through hallways that echoed with our footsteps, finally stopping at a large door. She knocked once, then opened it without waiting for response. The room was an office, dominated by a massive desk and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grounds. The man from last night sat in a leather chair behind the desk, his head bandaged, his arm in a sling, but very much alive. He looked up when we entered, and I saw that same intense focus from the crashed car. "Marcus Webb?" he said, his accent placing him somewhere in Eastern Europe. "Please, sit." I sat in the chair across from his desk, feeling profoundly aware of my torn jeans, my stained shirt, the way I must have smelled after months on the streets. He didn't seem to notice or care. "I'm Viktor Volkov," he said simply, "and I owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything. I did what anyone would do." He smiled, and it transformed his face from intimidating to almost warm. "That's where you're wrong. In my world, no one does what you did. No one risks themselves for a stranger, especially not when bullets are flying and pursuit vehicles are involved. You could have died. Instead, you saved me. I was a medic. It's instinct. Instinct is running away from gunfire, not toward it." He leaned forward, wincing slightly at the movement. "I meant what I said. I pay my debts. Tell me what you need." The question was so absurd I almost laughed. What did I need? Everything. A home, a job, medical care, dental work, therapy, clean clothes, hope for the future. The list was so long and overwhelming that I didn't know where to start. "I'm fine," I said automatically. "You're living under a highway overpass in November. You're wearing clothes that haven't been washed in weeks. Your hands are shaking from malnutrition or withdrawal or both. You are many things, Marcus Webb, but fine is not one of them." The directness of it hit harder than expected. I'd gotten used to being invisible, to people pretending not to see my reality. Having it laid out so bluntly made something crack open inside me. "I need a coat," I heard myself say. "You took mine last night, as evidence or whatever, and it's cold." Victor nodded to Elena, who disappeared immediately. He never took his eyes off me. "What else?" "Why do you care? You don't know me. I could be anyone." "But you're not anyone. You're the man who saved my life when you had every reason not to. You're former military. I can tell by the way you move, the way you assessed the crash site. You have medical training, and you're currently experiencing the kind of homelessness that kills people in winter." He paused. "I know what it's like to be invisible, Marcus. I came to this country with nothing, built everything I have from ground zero. I remember what it's like when the world decides you don't matter. I'm guessing your come-up didn't involve sleeping under bridges." His expression hardened slightly. "No, it involved things far worse. But we're not here to discuss my past. We're here to discuss your future." Elena returned carrying a coat. Not just any coat, but a high-end winter jacket that looked like it had never been worn. She handed it to me, and I took it automatically, running my hands over the material. It was the nicest thing I'd touched in months. "Thank you," I managed. That's a start, Viktor said. Now let's talk about employment. I stared at him. Employment? I need a driver, someone I can trust, which is surprisingly rare in my world. Someone with combat training, medical knowledge, and proven judgment under pressure. Someone who doesn't ask too many questions but knows when to act. He gestured to his bandaged head. Last night proved my current security team has gaps. You could fill one of them. I'm homeless. I don't even have a driver's license anymore. It expired, and I couldn't afford to renew it. These are problems with solutions. I have lawyers who can handle the license, an apartment you can use while you get back on your feet, and a salary of $80,000 a year to start. The number hit me like physical impact. 80,000. I'd never made that much even in my best years. It was impossible, absurd, clearly too good to be true. What's the catch? Viktor smiled again, that dangerous smile that suggested he appreciated my suspicion. The catch is that my world is not safe. The people who tried to kill me last night will try again. Working for me means entering a life where violence is always a possibility. It means loyalty above everything else. And it means never discussing my business with anyone outside my organization. You're a criminal. I'm a businessman who operates in gray areas. Some of my ventures are entirely legitimate, others less so. If you work for me, you'll drive me places, ensure my safety, and occasionally handle other tasks that require discretion. What you will never do is ask questions about the nature of my business or repeat anything you see or hear. Can you live with that? I thought about the overpass, about Duchess and the kid, and the two quiet men who shared everything they had. I thought about winter coming, about the cold that killed people slowly, about the gnawing hunger and the constant fear, and the way invisibility had started to feel permanent. If I say yes, can you help the others? The people I lived with under the bridge. Get them into better situations, shelters with actual services, not just cots and a meal. Something shifted in Viktor's expression, respect or surprise or both. You're negotiating for other people before yourself. They're good people who got unlucky. If you can help them, I'll drive you wherever you need to go. Viktor stood, extending his good hand across the desk. You have a deal, Marcus Webb. Welcome to my employ. I shook his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm that suggested his expensive suit and mansion hadn't erased wherever he'd come from. As I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a deal with the devil. But I also couldn't deny the relief flooding through me, the hope that had felt dead suddenly flickering back to life. One more thing, I said. I need to understand something. Why me? You could hire professional bodyguards, people with credentials and references. Why trust a homeless veteran you don't know? Viktor released my hand and sat back down, wincing again at the movement. Because in the moment that mattered, when you had every reason to stay hidden, to protect yourself, you chose to help me. That kind of character can't be taught or faked. I've been in dangerous situations many times, surrounded by armed guards and sophisticated security systems. Last night all of that failed. The only thing standing between me and death was a man with nothing who chose to give me his coat and his aid. That's worth more than any resume. The next 3 days were a blur of transformation. Elena handled everything with military efficiency. She took me to a clinic where a doctor who asked no questions examined me thoroughly, prescribed medications for infections I'd been ignoring, and scheduled follow-up appointments. She took me to a barber who cut away months of overgrown hair and shaved my face until I almost recognized myself in the mirror. She took me to a high-end men's store where I was fitted for suits, given casual clothes that actually fit, and shoes that didn't have holes in the soles. The apartment she showed me was in a secure building downtown, a one-bedroom with actual furniture and a kitchen that worked. Standing in the doorway that first night, looking at the bed with clean sheets and the bathroom with hot water, I felt something break inside me. I sat on the floor and cried, huge gasping sobs for everything I'd lost and everything I was terrified of losing again. But I didn't lose it. Instead, over the following weeks, I built something new. Viktor kept his word about helping the others from the overpass. Duchess went into a residential treatment program that actually addressed her addiction, instead of just warehousing her. The kid got connected with a youth services program. The two quiet men were placed in subsidized housing with job training programs. When I went back to check on them to explain where I'd gone, they looked at me like I was a ghost who'd returned from the dead. "You look good, Marcus," Duchess said, squeezing my hand with her thin fingers. "You look alive again." I started as Viktor's driver, and at first it was simple. Pick him up, drive him to meetings, wait in the car, drive him home. I didn't ask questions about the buildings we visited or the men in expensive suits who greeted him with deference and fear. I just drove. But slowly, the job evolved. Viktor started asking me to sit in on meetings, to stand behind his chair like a silent sentinel. He started sending me to pick up packages, to deliver messages, to handle tasks that required someone he could trust absolutely. And I began to understand the nature of his world. Viktor Volkov was the head of a criminal organization that controlled significant territory in the upper Midwest. Drug distribution, mostly, though he also had legitimate businesses that served as fronts and money laundering operations. He was ruthless when necessary, generous when it served him, and absolutely magnetic in a way that made people follow him without question. I should have been horrified. The moral code I'd been raised with, the oath I'd taken as a soldier, all of it should have sent me running. But I'd learned something on the streets that my previous life hadn't taught me. The world wasn't divided into good people and bad people. It was divided into people who helped you and people who didn't. People who saw you and people who didn't. People who kept their word and people who lied. Viktor saw me. Viktor helped me. Viktor kept his word. 3 months after that night under the overpass, I was standing in Viktor's office as he met with his lieutenants, 5 men who controlled different aspects of his organization. They were discussing a problem, someone encroaching on their territory, stealing shipments, sending a message that they didn't fear Viktor's retribution. "We need to respond," one of the lieutenants said, a thick-necked man everyone called Dmitri. "If we don't, we look weak. If we respond with too much force, we start a war we might not win," another countered. "These people have connections, resources. It's not like the old days when we could just eliminate problems." Viktor listened without speaking, his fingers steepled under his chin in that way he had when he was thinking deeply. Finally, his eyes landed on me. "Marcus, what do you think?" The room went silent. 5 sets of eyes turned to look at me with expressions ranging from surprise to hostility. I was the driver, the newest member of the organization, the one who'd been homeless 3 months ago. What business did I have offering strategic advice? "I think you need information before action," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the sudden attention. In the military, we called it reconnaissance. Find out who they are, what they want, what their vulnerabilities are. Then you can respond in a way that's proportional and effective rather than reactionary. Dmitri snorted. "The driver thinks he's a strategist now." Viktor's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. "The driver is a former Army Ranger with 2 combat tours and multiple commendations for service under fire. The driver saved my life when my supposedly elite security team failed. If the driver has an opinion, I want to hear it." He looked back at me. "Continue. You're assuming this is about territory or money," I said, thinking through the problem the way I'd been taught to analyze combat situations. "But what if it's personal? What if someone wants to provoke you specifically, to make you overreact? If you respond with force without understanding their true motivation, you might be playing into exactly what they want." Viktor nodded slowly. "So you're suggesting we investigate rather than retaliate?" I'm suggesting you gather intelligence before you commit to a course of action. Let me do it. I'm not known in your world yet. I can ask questions, observe, report back. Then you can decide how to respond from a position of knowledge, rather than anger. The lieutenants looked skeptical, but Viktor's expression had shifted to something like approval. You're volunteering for reconnaissance work in a situation that could be dangerous. I've done dangerous before, and you gave me a second chance at life. Seems like a fair trade. What I didn't say, what I barely admitted to myself, was that I needed this. I needed to be useful again, to have purpose beyond driving and standing silently in corners. The structure and danger of Viktor's world had given me something the legitimate world never had. A place where I mattered, where my skills had value, where someone saw what I could contribute instead of just seeing my failures. Viktor assigned me the task, and I spent the next 2 weeks infiltrating the organization that was challenging his territory. I used my homeless appearance, let my beard grow out, wore old clothes, and went back to the streets to blend in. It turned out the rival organization was using homeless people as mules, paying them to transport drugs and money because police rarely stopped or searched them. I made contact, volunteered my services, and worked my way up the chain of trust. What I learned changed everything. The rival organization wasn't trying to take over Viktor's territory. They were trying to provoke him into starting a war that would bring federal attention, which would give them cover to expand in areas Viktor didn't control. The entire thing was a setup, carefully calculated to use Viktor's reputation for swift retaliation against him. When I reported back, Viktor listened without interruption, then dismissed his lieutenants and asked me to stay. When we were alone, he poured 2 glasses of expensive vodka and handed me one. "You just saved me from making a catastrophic mistake," he said, raising his glass. "To reconnaissance." "To information," I countered, clinking my glass against his. We drank, and the vodka burned in a way that felt cleansing rather than painful. Viktor set down his glass and studied me with that intense focus that still made me slightly uncomfortable. "You're wasted as a driver, Marcus. You have tactical thinking, field experience, and the ability to operate in multiple worlds. I want to promote you." "To what?" "Head of Intelligence Operations. You'll coordinate information gathering, assess threats, advise on strategic decisions. You'll report directly to me, and you'll have resources to build a proper network." The offer was staggering, another impossible leap forward. "I've been here 3 months. Your lieutenants have been with you for years. They're not going to accept me in that role. My lieutenants serve me because I make them wealthy and powerful. They'll accept whatever I tell them to accept. The question is whether you'll accept. This isn't just driving anymore, Marcus. This is being part of the inner circle, the core decision-making group. It means more money, more responsibility, and significantly more danger. It also means there's no going back to the legitimate world if you change your mind." I thought about the overpass, about the cold and the hunger and the invisibility. I thought about the VA hospitals that couldn't help me, the jobs I couldn't get because of my record and my gaps in employment, the social safety net that had failed so completely that I'd ended up on the streets. The legitimate world had abandoned me long before I abandoned it. "Yes," I said. "I'll do it." Viktor smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Good. Because I have another task for you, something that requires your particular skills." He explained that there was a leak in his organization, someone feeding information to federal investigators. He needed to identify the leak and neutralize it, without alerting the authorities that he knew. It was exactly the kind of problem my military intelligence training had prepared me for, and I felt that old familiar rush of purpose. Over the next 6 months, I built Viktor's intelligence network from the ground up. I recruited informants, established surveillance protocols, created systems for gathering and analyzing information. I identified the leak, a mid-level distributor who'd been arrested on unrelated charges and offered a deal by the FBI. Viktor handled the situation quietly, relocating the man's family to another state and paying him off to provide false information that would lead investigators in wrong directions. I also discovered something unexpected. Viktor's organization, while criminal, operated with a code. They didn't deal in human trafficking. They refused to sell to kids. They had rules about violence, using it only when necessary rather than as a first resort. In the moral complexity of the criminal world, Viktor was actually one of the better options, which was a depressing commentary on society, but also somehow reassuring. During this time, Viktor and I developed something beyond employer and employee. We'd have long conversations late at night, him telling stories about coming to America with nothing, building his empire through intelligence and ruthlessness. Me telling stories about combat, about the men I'd served with, about the system that had failed us when we came home. We were both men who'd been invisible once, who'd clawed our way to visibility through whatever means available. "You know what the difference is between us and legitimate businessmen?" Viktor asked one night as we sat in his office, sharing vodka after a particularly complex operation. "They're willing to let people die passively, through poverty and lack of opportunity and systematic failure. We're honest about the harm we cause. At least we don't pretend we're innocent." It was a rationalization, and we both knew it. But there was also truth in it. Uncomfortable truth about how society decided which kinds of harm were acceptable and which were criminal. A year after Viktor had pulled up in that black sedan to recruit me off the street corner, everything changed again. The organization that had tried to provoke him into a war made another move, this time directly targeting Viktor's legitimate businesses in an attempt to dry up his money laundering operations. They burned down 2 of his restaurants, killed 3 employees, and sent a message that they were done with subtle provocations. Viktor called an emergency meeting of his full leadership. About 20 people gathered in the warehouse that served as a secure location for sensitive discussions. I stood at his right hand, as had become my place, watching faces as he outlined the situation. "They've crossed a line," he said, his accent thicker than usual, a sign of his anger. "They killed our people, people who had nothing to do with our business dealings. That's not strategy. That's murder. We respond, and we respond hard." There was general agreement, but I saw the trap immediately. This was exactly what they wanted, an escalation that would justify them bringing in heavier firepower, that would create chaos they could exploit. "It's a trap," I said quietly. Everyone looked at me. Viktor raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "They're goading you again, but this time they're willing to kill innocent people to do it. They want you to retaliate so they can claim self-defense, while they escalate beyond anything you can match. They're trying to force you into a war you can't win, not because you're not strong enough, but because winning would cost you everything you've built." "So what do you suggest?" Dmitri challenged. "We do nothing while they kill our people?" "I suggest we hit them where they're not expecting it. Not their operations, not their people, but their reputation. We expose them to law enforcement, provide evidence of their activities, make them fight a war on 2 fronts. While they're dealing with federal investigations, they can't focus on us." Viktor considered this, his expression unreadable. "You're suggesting we cooperate with authorities." "I'm suggesting we use them as a weapon. Not cooperation, just strategic information sharing. Anonymous tips that happen to be accurate. Let the system destroy them for us." It was morally dubious at best, but it was also smart. Viktor saw it, and so did most of the others. Over the next 3 months, I orchestrated a campaign of carefully leaked information, each piece designed to seem like it came from within the rival organization rather than from us. Federal investigators opened multiple cases. Arrests followed. The rival organization's leadership was decimated, and their operations collapsed under the weight of law enforcement attention. We'd won without firing a shot, and Viktor's reputation for strategic brilliance grew even stronger. But I was getting tired. The moral compromises were adding up, each one a small weight on my conscience that collectively was becoming crushing. I'd traded one kind of survival for another, and while this one came with money and purpose and visibility, it also came with knowledge of things I couldn't unknow, participation in things I couldn't undo. I was standing in my apartment one evening, looking out at the city lights, when my phone rang. Viktor, which was unusual. He typically summoned me through Elena, rather than calling directly. "Marcus, I need you to come to the estate, alone. Don't tell anyone where you're going." The tone of his voice triggered alarm bells. "What's wrong?" "Everything. Just come." I drove to his estate, mind racing through possibilities. When I arrived, the gate was open, which never happened. The grounds were dark, no security lights, no guards visible. Every instinct screamed danger, but I couldn't abandon Viktor if he needed help. I approached the house carefully, weapon drawn, using cover the way I'd been taught. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the lights were off except for a glow coming from the office. I moved through the shadows, adrenaline making everything sharp and clear. Viktor sat in his office alone, a gun on the desk in front of him, a bottle of vodka half empty beside it. He looked up when I entered, and I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Defeat. "What happened?" "Betrayal," he said simply. "My oldest friend, my most trusted lieutenant. He's been working with the authorities for 2 years, building a case. They're coming for me tomorrow with enough evidence to put me away for life." He gestured to the gun. "I have a choice. Prison or this. Neither is acceptable." I sat down across from him, mind working furiously. "There's always another choice." "Not this time. I built this empire, and I'll be damned if I spend the rest of my life in a cage because someone I trusted betrayed me." He picked up the gun, not pointing it at anything, just holding it. "I wanted to thank you before I made my decision. You gave me a year of loyalty when I needed it most. You never betrayed me, never lied to me, never failed me. That's rare enough to be worth acknowledging." "Put the gun down, Viktor." "Why? So I can go to prison? Watch everything I built be torn apart? Become another cautionary tale about immigrant criminals who thought they could win?" He laughed bitterly. "I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees." I thought about the man who'd pulled up in a black sedan to rescue me from the streets, who'd seen worth in a homeless veteran when the rest of the world saw trash. I thought about the empire he'd built, the people he employed, the strange code of honor he maintained in a dishonorable business, and I made a decision. What if you could disappear? Really disappear with enough money to start over somewhere else, with a new identity and a clean slate? Viktor looked at me like I was crazy. "The authorities know everything. There's nowhere to run." "There's always somewhere to run if you have the right help. I have contacts from my military days, people who owe me favors, people who specialize in making people vanish when governments want them found. It's expensive, and it's permanent, but it's possible." "Why would you do this for me?" "Because you did it for me. You saw me when I was invisible. You gave me purpose when I had none. You made me matter when the world had decided I didn't. That's worth something. That's worth everything." Viktor set down the gun, and I saw hope flicker in his eyes, fragile and desperate. "If we do this, you're implicated. You'd be helping a fugitive escape. That's federal prison for you if they catch you. Then we don't get caught. Thank you for following this story of loyalty, survival, and second chances. If this story moved you, please share it and let me know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Your support means everything.